can't actually believe it, but it's February next week, so it must be time for the January wrap up. Let's do this. Hi everybody, it's Lydia here. So I've already done a few reviews for some of the books that I'm going to mention in today's video, but a number of them I haven't done, so I thought I would do a wrap up this month, even though I don't normally do this, but there you go. So the first book I read this month, and indeed the first book I read this year, was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I absolutely loved this book. It was such an interesting take on the whole apocalyptic genre, and it had Shakespeare in it, so what more could I want? It was perfect for me. It was very well written, it was very clever, and it was one of those books that has a lot of threads and you honestly don't have a clue how they're all going to fit together, but miraculously by the end they do. To a certain extent. There was maybe one or two that I felt a bit left hanging in a way, but I really enjoyed it in general. It was really an enjoyable read, it was well written, and I would really recommend reading it. Next up was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which I was really late to, but I did unsurprisingly because everyone else has been raving on about it for months. I really enjoyed it. It was so clever, and I honestly didn't know whether I was going to appreciate as much I did, because it is set in the 80s, or not set in the 80s, but it has, you know, tons and tons of 80s references into it, and because I was only born in the very late 80s, I honestly didn't know whether I would kind of appreciate it that much, but I still really enjoyed it. I think it's probably the kind of the book that had you grown up in that era you would have loved it even more, but I didn't, and I still absolutely enjoyed it, albeit I found the ending a bit of a sort of flat blah. But apart from that, it is a really enjoyable book, and I really recommend reading it if you haven't already, but you probably have because I'm so late to it. Next up was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is inspired by the Iliad, and particularly Achilles and Patroclus and their relationship as they grow up and go on to fight at the fall of Troy. And I asked for this for Christmas, and the reason I did is because I studied classical literature in school, and in particular I studied the Iliad, and I really enjoy that period of literature, and I was really looking forward to seeing what this book was like. I'd heard a couple of mixed reviews about it. I wasn't really sure what to expect, so I did go into it honestly with low expectations. And yet I was still disappointed in it, and I honestly thought it was terrible. There were a number of reasons for this. One, it was all written in modern style writing, and for me that really clashed with the characters and the era that she was writing about, especially when you consider that these characters are most well known because of the Iliad, and that whole era of classical literature, they're written in a very specific style, and I feel like this book would have worked better and would have come across better if it had been written in that similar style. The best description I've seen of this book is that it is fan fiction of the Iliad, and honestly I couldn't agree more. And not just that it's fan fiction of the Iliad, it's bad fan fiction of the Iliad. I will say it does go into the fall of Troy, and I did feel like the book itself got better once that part of the book happened, but that didn't happen until about 2/3 of the way through, and for the first 65% of the book I just thought it was really silly. Honestly, I don't know how else to say it. It was basically a coming of age story, and I think it could have been done really well, but a lot of it I didn't enjoy it because of the writing style. Next up was Gates of Thread and Stone by Laurie M. Lee. I've already done 2 reviews on this, so I'm not going to spend ages on this, but I did really enjoy it. I would recommend it. However, it is one of those books that I think you have to you put up with the fact that maybe it's not the best written book, or that there were a few plot holes, because it is one of those just generally enjoyable books. There were a lot of parts of this that did annoy me, but I did finish it, and I am looking forward to the sequel, so that obviously says something. Next up was The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer. I read this after a recommendation from a friend, and it's a contemporary which I don't normally read, but I did really enjoy it. It did remind me a lot of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, so if you did enjoy that I would really recommend this book. I don't think I loved it so much that I will read it again, but I do think that the author wrote it very well, and specifically in reference to the mental health side of the book, he really got inside the character's head extremely well and understood a lot of what he was going through, and that for me was really what made this book really special, because I do think this book, and in particular the character, is one of those characters that could really go wrong if you don't understand what they're going through properly, and yet Nathan Filer really got that character so well, and I understand why a lot of people love this book. My penultimate book this month was The Chimes by Anna Smale. I haven't actually finished this yet. There are a number of reasons for that, not least because the Mime Order was out this week, but also I found it one of those books that is quite difficult to get into. It's very stylized because it is about a world where music is very much kind of a part of everyone's life. I do think it's the kind of book that probably will get going, and once it gets going you will really enjoy, but it is taking me a long time to get into it and my interest in it is definitely wavering, but I do want to get through it. It's not actually out yet, it's out on the 15th of February, and I do want to finish it because I do think it's a really interestingly written book, but yeah, I haven't actually finished it yet. Finally, this month is Matchbox Theatre by Michael Frayn. I got this for Christmas and it is a collection of 30 short plays, and I haven't finished them all, I've got a few left to read. In general, I am really enjoying it though. Some of them are very clever, some of them not so clever and a little bit weird, but they're really interesting, and from my point of view I love acting and I love theatre, so they're really interesting to read and to imagine how they would be staged, because the majority of them, they only have kind of, I think the max number of characters in them is probably 4. The majority of them have only 1 or 2 different characters, so it's interesting to imagine how it would be staged from my point of view, because I'm a bit of a theatre nerd, if you haven't guessed already. So that is it for my wrap up this month. I will be back tomorrow with another video, but until then I hope you have a good day and bye!